let's kick things off with a little bit of an understanding of who we have here today. And then we'll kick off intros on everyone you're seeing up here. So first off, which functional area most closely aligns with your worker interest? You're going to use your phone, and we have CS, we have UI, UX, product management, and engineering. Let's see some of those votes coming in. Or if you want to shout it in the room, you can if you don't have your phone. It's just so some of the panelists can guide their conversations according to who we have here.
I'm not getting to the poll, but product.
All right, all right.
Thank you.
Yeah, see 0 votes.
Also in product.
Okay. We're hearing some product folks in the audience. Okay, we won't spend too much time on this if people are struggling with voting. One of the other questions we have, let's just get a show of hands though. Anyone not in product? Who here is in CS? Okay, raise them high. You're what?
Operations.
Okay, operations, nice. And any UI, UXers? Awesome, okay, good crowd for you, Seth. All right, and then lastly, we're gonna ask, just so we have visibility into where you want the conversation to go with innovation. This is going to be, are you pre-product market fit? Do you have a single product and are focused on scaling it? We are exploring a new product line, or you have multiple product lines, or are you more of a license and distributor in terms of the products that you have to offer? Okay, this one is getting some votes cast. All right, panelists, we're seeing mostly the top 3. Either pre-product market fit, okay, early stage 0 to 1. We have single product and focused on scaling it. Okay, so there's some early stage trying to scale, and then some who are just exploring new product lines. Great. So keep that in your minds. All right, my name's Anna Valyani, like I said, and I am a Series A Director of Product. So we focus on tech that helps space planners make better decisions about the spaces they have and how to better manage them and use them and scale them. And let me toss it over to Seth.
Yeah, hi, can everyone hear me okay? Great.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Seth Snyder. I'm a Senior Director of Design and UX Research at Cohere Health based in Boston. We are automating prior authorization and trying to transform care management for health insurance companies and providers, basically breaking down barriers between patients, doctors, and health plans. Before Cohere, I was at Universal Robots leading the design team there. And before that, I was at Frog Design in San Francisco doing consulting for clients big and small all over the world, startups and big corporations, and across many different industries. So super excited to be here with you all today. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shruti Sharma. I have over 2 decades of experience across SaaS organizations such as Citrix, LogMeIn, Constant Contact, and those roles that I've had have spanned across product management, sales engineering, and customer success. And now I have actually formed my own consultancy that focuses on a customer experience. So I advise and I consult with SaaS organizations to help them improve their post-sale processes to make sure that they're really retaining their customers and making sure their customers are regularly engaged. I also mentor for Techstars and Venture Lane, and I'm really excited to be here. So nice to meet all of you.
Hi, my name is Glo Robinson. I'm currently a product manager at Warner Brothers Discovery. So for anybody who has the Max app, yes, I work on that. Prior to that, I worked in the land of startups. I had my own startup, and then I consulted, mentored, and advised early stage to help them achieve product market fit. So happy to be here.
Fabulous. All right. So when we set the foundation and we talk about product innovation, it's hard to know what is allowed, what you're empowered to do without talking about your organization's culture. So can each of you kind of go through and talk about where your organization stands in terms of how it sees product innovation? Whoever wants to go first.
You want to start? Okay. So I'm not part of an organization today, but in my previous life, I will say that product innovation is an absolute necessity. I really think it's a non-negotiable. So it doesn't really matter in terms of a startup or a mature organization. And I think from a startup point of view, it's really almost part of their DNA. That's what your customers are almost expecting of you. So, that's why customers, I'm going to speak more from an angle of a customer, is that customers expect that innovation to happen. That's why they also chose you. And they're making that investment to see, how can you help them solve problems? So I'm a big believer there. And one last point I'll make is that I think it's your opportunity, if you innovate, to retain your customers. Otherwise, you'll start to see that retention kind of hit.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think I'll share that one of the reasons that I joined Cohere, I was employee number 27, I think, and now we're over 1,200 people. One of the reasons I joined is because I saw in our chief product officer who hired me a real vision for taking a design-centric, user-centric, problem-first approach to developing products and services at Cohere. And to me, that was the most essential thing for me, working for someone who understood the value of design and culturally the idea of how to do innovation the right way. And since then, we've just grown from there. And I think one of the things that I see as my charge is helping solidify that culture of how do we build empathy with our users? How do we bake in that problem first mentality, not just rushing to a solution every time, and kind of culturally layer in those philosophies all across the organization, even as we've grown so big?
I would say from the experiences I had, I'll start off with the corporate one. I think it's about really figuring out in a product organization how to healthily incentivize people to come up with innovative ideas, because the issues that we run into is that we have to meet OKRs, like, hey, we're launching CNN at the end of the month, but it's like, okay, how do we have enough resourcing to ensure that we can launch CNN when we've made all these press releases about it? But then at the same time, it's like, oh, I want to build a really cool internal tool, or how do we use ChatGPT, or like within our internal workflows? And so I think the issue with bigger companies especially is how do we create a healthy culture where it's kind of almost like going back to Google's like 20% rule, like, hey, 20% of my time is actually going to be towards projects that are not on the roadmap, that are not scoped out, or that I've not gotten necessarily all the approval. So I think that's one area to consider when it comes to product innovation. On the startup side, I think it's really about making that case on, hey, I have these, it all rolls up to it at the end of the objectives, right? Like, what are your OKRs? Are we trying to achieve product market fit? Are we trying to achieve profitability? Are we just trying to get our first customer, right? And so I think the thing is, if you're able to look at the innovation sense on how does this actually help our goals, or being very intentional, hi, this doesn't help our goal today, but this could down the line. And I think the way that you're able to socialize that within your company, whether it's 5 people or 60,000 people, is kind of understanding what those fundamental principles are, because that's how you're going to be able to move them forward. So I think I'm looking at it from the perspective of, hey, I have a really cool idea. How do I socialize it to actually so I can actually get approved to work on it in any space?
And I think Seth and Glow, you both kind of hit on the scale factor a little bit. So let's talk a little bit more about innovation in the context of early stage versus late stage, or how factors might be different in a startup versus a corporation, or B2B versus B2C. What are some of these factors that influence how likely product innovation is to happen, or the people involved who are able to make it happen?
Oh, should I start? I think the first question I would ask is, how do we define product innovation in this case?
How would you define it?
How would I define it? Great question. I think it's about being able to try something that we haven't done before, take a different approach. Because I think the biggest issue is that when we're doing customer, interviewing our customers, what they need versus what they want are 2 different things a lot of the times. Yes, I can see a lot of heads nodding about that, right? And so I think the biggest question is, understanding and listening. They're saying, well, I have this problem, or I have this issue. But then it's your job in product is to say, well, I want to understand how that problem is going to scale. Or let's do some math. Let's do some product math here, right? And understanding what's this going to be like in 6 months? But you don't want to build out a roadmap for 6 months, because that's a bad idea too. I even say that from a corporate perspective. I'm like, anything that's like a 12-month roadmap, no. Let's get rid of that. ASAP, please. Because the thing is, you're going to have that constant sense of iteration. So I think innovation is being able to say, hey, how do we look at the future? How do we look at how, if you come to me and say, I can't do X today, well, I can't just build a solution for you. I have to look at how is this solution going to play out, what allows me to try new things. But at the same time, it's like there's this huge argument of, well, do I build something that's, really grandiose and is going to meet all my needs and then have engineering spend a year on it? Or do I build something that I can ship in 2 months? It might be kind of rickety, but then we can at least validate what we're actually trying to solve and actually validate in a hypothesis. And so I think it's really about, I would really come back to, I guess, looking at product innovation, saying, how do we allow us to try these small tests and create a process and an infrastructure at any size company to allow that to be happening? How can we improve the velocity of trying experiments that are not actually going to impact the roadmap to the point where we can't meet our OKRs? So that's how I would define it. That was a long-winded answer. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and just building on that in terms of the way you asked the question of different stages of a startup, different scales of a company. So having been at Cohere from basically pre-customer now to having 6 or 7 customers. Our customers are big insurance companies, by the way. So like landing one customer is a huge deal. It's B2B, not consumer. So each new customer implementation is a huge deal for us in revenue and in kind of product growth opportunities. So in the beginning, pre-customer, it's like, okay, what are the jobs to be done that we think we need to solve, but we didn't actually have real users who, we could really deploy things with. So we were running experiments, as Glo said, trying to figure out what would work, what would solve the problem, what would be impactful. And at this point now, we've got several customers, and it's about trying to figure out what are the things that actually are repeatable, like what's the same across all these different customers, and what's gonna drive impact, what's gonna change behavior, what motivates people to change behavior at this scale, and trying to still find ways to innovate. One of the things Shruti and I were chatting about before the panel is when you start to have customers, it's a great problem to have, but oftentimes it can change the way that you think about your roadmap, and it can become really burdened by just checking off the requirement boxes from all of your customers, right? And it becomes challenging to make space for more strategic, more innovative work, perhaps. So one thing that we've done is we've allocated an entire squad, a set of designers, PMs, and engineers, just to focus on strategic work, so that no matter what happens, no matter how crazy things get with client implementations, whether we're running late or not implementing on time, we're always going to have this protected squad focusing on strategic work. Because we know that's going to be really important, and it's going to give us leverage too. We're going to be building things in that squad that will make future implementations faster and easier for us. So otherwise, you're kind of just always running behind and just checking off those lists as you go.
And I'd like to say one thing. I think impact is really a huge point that both of them made. I know in many of the companies I've worked at, we used to have like innovation day. And that was really, just a very refreshing experience, getting everybody in the company to come together to hear what their thoughts are and what's really, what's on top of mind, because they're also talking to customers, some of the customer facing teams. So I think, keeping it as a culture of product innovation across the organization can be very valuable. You'll create a certain environment that really wants to share ideas, and so I think that can also drive really good product innovation.
So we talked a little bit about the culture and started weaving a little bit into the strategy and process. So let's go there. Let's talk about, how do you know who you're building for when you're innovating on your product line? And things might be different. Your first set of customers might not be your lasting ones, or you might find that you need to pivot a little bit. Describe how you know who you're building for. Seth, you want to start with this one?
So we always start with, what's the impact that we want to have? What are the metrics and key outcomes that we want to have? And then who are all the different people who might be involved in helping us get there? And in healthcare, it's super complicated, as you all know. There isn't ever just one person who needs to change one thing and you're done. It's a lot of different people involved, right? So we go out and we start doing foundational research, we call it, where we interview and we try to understand what are all the workflows and jobs that people are doing. And in healthcare, it's oftentimes the patient themselves, the primary care doctor, the specialist, the insurance company, all the different roles of people in each of those different organizations. What are they all doing? Where are their pain points and where are their anxieties? Where are they being pushed to do something differently or pulled into another direction? And where might we be able to address some of those things? We've been able to take a pretty wide lens to that, given that we're a startup, which is one of the reasons that I really enjoy working in this space. Healthcare is so complicated and there's so many different ways that you could think about solving it. And we're a young enough company that we haven't sort of become too like pigeonholed in one solution space. So it might be different at other companies where you're already kind of like really focused in on like, this is what we build. But at Cohere, we're really open to exploring a lot of different ways to solve a problem. So you start with that research, you map out the workflows, you identify those key opportunity moments, and then start figuring out how to actually build some impactful solutions in those areas.
So I kind of want to talk about, the persona research that initially is done, right? As a startup organization or even mature organization, right? I think that level of research is so valuable. Those previous insights, let's not waste that effort that's been put in. So if you are a startup, you are starting at some point where you have identified a user or persona or an ICP, right? And, those insights are available to you, meaning what their frustrations are, what the gaps are, and that's what you initially started solving for. However, I feel it's, especially in an early stage environment, there's an evolving persona. So, the persona could be changing and you're innovating for them. So to do that, I think what's valuable is to have an ongoing open dialogue with your users. So kind of what you were alluding to as well is having that conversation regularly and trying to see what other problems there might be, going back to the drawing board and seeing, are you really innovating for that? Or are you opening up a whole new segment of individuals that you're building for? So again, it goes back to the impact. It goes back to that really having that process down of, are you going back and really understanding who you're speaking to? Because you don't want to build for something and then have no one use it. I mean, that's just wasted time there. So in terms of a process, I think that could be really valuable.
Adding on to the persona aspect, I think one of the biggest problems or toughest issues to solve for is when you have a product and you're like, wow, there's so many different use cases or so many different problems our one solution solves. Does anyone else resonate with that? I remember when I was working on my startup, we were, our product was really simple. This was pre-AI buzz, but basically giving actionable insights based on Zoom calls. And our target markets were content creators and brands. And so the thing is, even within the content creation space, well, how do you narrow that? Content creators is like so many different types of things. You have fitness content creators and you've got, professional content creators, and you have lifestyle influencers. And so what we noticed was what are the content creators that want to have actual conversations with their fans, that really care about having that, reciprocity or that sort of satiating engagement. And so we noticed that what we did was we started looking at like the comment sections within their social media channels to say which ones were having the longest comment threads. And the answer we found was mental health content creators. And so I think the thing is to add on to that sense and like, how do I narrow down who's my stickiest user? It's really about going after and saying, gosh, like you can still have a plan and a strategy of, yes, I want to branch out to all these types of content creators eventually, but you just need that one sticky one that almost meets all the boxes where every single value proposition that your product offers, they couldn't live without. And so I think to tie in sort of like that aspect is really almost looking at it like who's the critical user. Like even in my corporate job, like there's an internal tool I'm building and everyone's like, well, who's the core stakeholder? And it's like, I've mapped it all out. There's like 6 different stakeholders that use this, but it's really about almost centering it around one and then letting the other stakeholders say, wait, I actually could use this too. Oh, I could actually use that as well. But at least that one that you've been closely working with at least has that sort of, initial buy-in.
And I'm going to stick with you for a moment because all of you talked about the who are we building for? and you started getting into the what should we build, or like you zoomed in, or you found all of the ways to extract your target customer. So now tell me a little bit about the process on how you know what you should be building with all of those possibilities, all of those use cases, all of the signal and the noise that comes in your inbox. How do you go about it?
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, it's tricky, no doubt. So I feel I'm a big process framework kind of a person. So there's got to be some system in place where there's an ongoing collaboration effort. And what I mean by that is between your customer facing teams, even if it's one, and your product development teams, right? You want to get on the same page. You want to have like almost some accountability there that we need to understand what is happening. Like, what are you hearing? How do we bring that back? And then let's assess what's I think you said this earlier, like there's 20% product innovation. You're going to give a certain percentage to building new things versus things that are just have to get done, right? So I think that's a really good approach. And then measuring, you know, I recall there was one place where I worked was we would break down each of the features that we're hearing about or what we're doing and mapping out the why behind it, mapping out like the impact behind it. And if you have that sort of visual, it will help with those discussions. It will lead to less frustration. You'll have more of a systematic approach to what to build, when to build it, and help you prioritize. So, and then the last thing I'll say, you know, the frequency of requests that you get in doesn't necessarily equate to building on that. So that's always up for discussion. But yeah, I think some level of a collaboration effort is critical here.
Love that. So now we've talked about who we're building for, how we know what to build. Now, Seth, I'm going to pick on you for the how do we get this done? Let's talk about the relationships involved in execution. How do you go about delivering on the things that need to be built for the right people?
Sure. Yeah, so we think about a squad model, like I was saying earlier. Design, PM, and engineering should always be involved all the way from the get-go. We often think of research as part of design, but if you have research as a separate function, that should be there. And then if you need like a subject matter expert, in our case, we have clinical subject matter experts, or whatever your industry might be, you might want to include a fourth person in that group who can just provide a ton of subject matter expertise. And, you know, basically starting from that very beginning of the process, we were talking about identifying the person who you're most feeling like if you change their behavior or their experience in some way, it'll most likely yield the outcomes, the business outcomes that you want. And then getting really deep on what is their context, you know, what are they doing before and after that? Why are they doing what they're doing today? And what might actually change the needle? You know, people are we're set in our ways in most instances. So getting people to change what they're doing is not easy. And in order to have any hope of that, you really have to get deep into their context. So, you know, what is it about those mental health content creators that makes them want to use that thing or not use that thing? What made them wake up one day and decide, I want to really engage in this platform? And then taking those little nuggets of insight and saying, okay, it's actually this other thing that we didn't even think we were focused on that much, but that's actually the nugget that was resulting in that much impact. And then we build and scale and grow that piece. So that's how we think about it. In terms of what happens next, you know, once you start to identify what kind of solution space makes sense as far as what's going to result in the outcomes you want, we get really funky with brainstorming, right? We get everybody together, we do a bunch of whiteboarding, we do a bunch of sketching, we make prototypes, really low fidelity things. We try to explore those ideas. And as soon as makes sense, we bring those things back to those end users and see how they fit into their context. We try to make realistic looking prototypes so that we can put things in front of people and watch them respond to those things, watch them use those things. And if it seems like it's going to be impactful, we start getting into higher fidelity design, start to actually tap into the engineer's skill set, start to build some things out, and try to identify what's kind of the smallest increment of value that we can ship and actually measure the real impact at scale. Because up until now, you're just sort of guessing at what's going to work. So as quickly as possible, we want to actually ship something that people are really using and measure that impact and see as soon as we can after it's shipped what is actually changing, if anything. Sometimes it fails, in which case you go back to the drawing board. Sometimes it has some success, but not as much. So you figure out how to tune it or amplify it or build something a little bit better or different, and just kind of go from there and iterate your way towards achieving the bigger goal that you had.
And what about when it comes to influencing others, right? So the relationship aspect that also gets the buy-in needed, right? Like, how do you get the buy-in needed? So walk me through that a little bit, Glow, Shruti.
Yeah, I can definitely start. So I think different buy-in happens differently at different stage of companies. So I like to joke my job in corporate is I'm almost like a corporate politician, where if I have like an idea that I'm trying to parade around that's not on the roadmap, I have to get buy-in with engineering, I have to get buy-in with design, I have to get buy-in with my team. And it's this whole rigmarole of trying to say, hi, this is why we need to have resourcing for this when it's not on the roadmap. And it's really, I think, building that. I think what I noticed, at least in a corporate setting, is that you have a lot of people that are excited for innovative things that are not like utility things that we need to build out to launch something because leadership told us, but more of like, no, this is really going to be innovative and super cool. And I want to be part of something that I have purpose for, that I'm excited about. Because yes, as much as I'm excited about solving backend problems for a content management system, there are other things as well that, you know, are also super exciting. And so I think the biggest thing is to really, one of the tactical things I wanted to add on to your point was one of the frameworks I like to use when I'm mapping out sort of like the impact is problem statement, like, or stakeholder, their existing pain points, the impact of those pain points, like how much, like, you know, almost leveling it, like I can't live without this, or gosh, this is a pain point for me every single day. And then mapping out the OKRs. What are their OKRs that they're roll up to, that their team is responsible for? And just even mapping out those things is a really great starting point. And then the other thing that I also like to do is interview people and say, tell me what exactly you do on a day-to-day work day. Like, what is your workflow? And really mapping that out. I highly recommend recording it, and then using, you know, ChatGPT to like summarize parts of it, or saying, hey, outline each step like a job's to be done. Oh, so helpful, insanely helpful. Get it out on a Fig Jam board. Yes, I will die on this hill. Fig Jam is better than Miro. I don't care what people say. It's my hot take. But I think, again, getting back to that stakeholder aspect, in startups, it's more about, I'd say your stakeholders are more like investors, and your stakeholders in corporate are more like your peers. They're the people that are actually going to give you the resourcing. And so it's all understanding what at the end of the day, it's understanding what their objectives are and how whatever you're working on that's like out of the woodworks somehow impacts those.
Yeah, I would echo what she said. To be honest, I think it's really hitting on the problem that your customer is having, right? I mean, nothing speaks more than the problem. And if you can support it with a metric, with an actual data point, it goes even further with your leadership or whoever you're trying to make this business case to. So yeah, that's what I would end with.
So from your personal experiences, how often are innovation projects getting shelved versus you actually have the resources, the capacity, the empowered ability to execute on these projects?
I can also start with this one. So I think transparently, I don't know how much people keep up with media news, but we are doing lots of layoffs right now at WBG. And so leadership changes are happening. You know, a lot of structural changes are happening. And so I think we've been trying to look at creative solutions to still maintain that momentum. I think one thing that is really tricky is that, given the nature of mergers and acquisitions, is that we've been in launch mode for like eternity at this point. So it's like, as soon as we launched HBO and EMEA, like then it was like, oh, well, we're merging. Oh, great. Okay, we're going to launch a whole new product, which was Max, that you all experienced in May. And we've got plans to expand globally as well in that area. And so I think the issue is, it's like, how do we as a product culture incentivize sort of having that like 20% rule, and trying to find teams that also align with roadmaps, where maybe something that you find innovative on different teams also might be aligning with your interests as well. And so I think to keep that product innovation going, it's about being excited about what the other opportunities are. Because I think it's so easy, especially in a job, to just kind of go on the same treadmill or hamster wheel every single day and be like, well, what else is out there? But I think it's really just asking questions, and if you can communicate expressing, hey, I'm interested in this, at least in a bigger environment, then someone will know someone to connect you in that right place than just staying in your one lane.
My hope is that innovation isn't a kind of project, but it's a philosophy and it's a process that helps you solve problems more effectively and more efficiently. So, to pick on your question, and I'm like, innovation projects don't get shelved. You just take more of an innovative approach to some projects versus others. And to me, like, when you're feeling the pressure of client launches or company consolidations, innovation should be the thing that you're doing more, because it actually can help you get to the right answer sooner. Like, if you're just kind of following a traditional process of, just building what the customer asked for or what your boss asked for, that's not an innovative process. And it's also not going to yield as good of a result. So to me, innovation should be able to actually help you get to a more impactful solution more quickly. I think the way that you asked the question, that was probably more around like strategic kind of initiatives, and I think those are important as well, and they do tend to be the things that get cut when the pressure is on in whatever kind of sense. And like I was saying, at Cohere, we're fortunate to have kind of learned over the last couple of years that not having dedicated resources on those things can make your life harder. So each new implementation, we're like, oh man, why didn't we make this easier for ourselves? And we learn the same lessons over and over again. So it's like, okay, let's dedicate some time and figure out how to automate some of the implementation pieces that we're having to do manually every time. So looking for those opportunities internally to make the process more efficient for yourself, I think can be a great way to advocate for those kinds of projects too.
Well, I'm curious if any of you have a hot take on this one, but when it comes to getting things done, what's your philosophy on outsourcing requirements? Does it lead to greater success in like getting something innovative or disruptive out the door, or does it hurt, or does it depend?
Outsourcing requirements. I think my hot take is I don't love that, but maybe there's something in it that other folks will share that's good about it. To me, I think it's really important that everyone who's involved in implementing, working on the solution is there to hear the source of inspiration that led to the requirement firsthand, or at least like really close to firsthand.
When you mean by outsourcing, do you mean like getting an agency or like third party? So my experience with that is, on the client side, be insanely organized to know exactly what you want to do, provide that documentation, provide that really, like, you need to almost think of them like they're an extension of your team and delegate and manage them to that level. Otherwise, it's going to be a hot mess from my personal experience. I think on the other side of being the consultant or working in adjacent, it's being very clear about what your deliverables, outcome, and impact is. And so you really need like a insanely good project manager to really help facilitate that execution, because that person's not going to be part of every single conversation that you have just by the nature, unless they're working full time with you. Literally, you're adopting them. So I think being able to figure out what is the key pieces of information that they need in terms of again, coming back to those impacts, those outlines, and what goal are you trying to meet, and making sure to give them that context, and being the consultant to question, hi, is this really the best outcome that you want? Or like, as in, is this the goal that you want to try to achieve? But being also on the client side to really have your ducks in a row to really say, this is the roadmap and this is why we need resourcing and this is how it's going to happen. Really having a vision, strategic perspective of how all these things play out is the only way that's going to work. And it's really, I would argue, more on the client than it is on the consultant in that sense, to actually make this be effective.
All right, so I think everyone get comfortable with everything taking a little bit longer than you expect for it to be delivered. But let's transition a little bit to post-innovation announcements and engagement. So when you're basically letting people know about a new feature or new project that you're doing, or as Seth said, it's not a project, but it's ongoing innovation, right? That announcement has to be done right. You have to onboard your customers to it. How much do you rely on something automated in communicating things out there versus do something specialty to communicate what's been released to either existing customers or new customers?
So I think we get really excited about all the amazing functionality and features that we have. Okay, let's say like we have innovated, we have all the 20% done, right? But before you do that, what I find important is that you take a step back and think about your customer at that point and the communication you're about to roll out, right? So, and a few things you want to consider there is first, do you really know what the goal and the outcome your customer really wants, right? Like, do you really have that solid understanding? So what that might require on your end is to dig deeper into your previous conversations to say, okay, well, did this customer say these things in our previous conversations where I can bring this new feature to their attention and it's relevant for them? So that I think is a first sort of almost kind of homework you need to do. Two, again, back to the impact and the why behind the feature. When I work with my clients, I always kind of say, okay, but why would you be wanting to sell this feature to your customer? Like really map out that use case for them. Almost get to a point where they're visualizing using that feature or understanding what that pain point is for them. And maybe there isn't. So that at that point, you know that maybe it's not just relevant just yet. I can bring this up at a later time. Right. So, and the other couple of things more like, just kind of things you should be doing is from a communication angle is make sure you understand the product fully, the new feature, right? You don't want to go in and having conversations or even through any communication method, not knowing your product really well. So if that requires you to, set up a time with your product team, dig deep into that new feature and understanding all the nuances of it, do that. Even create a FAQ kind of one pager for yourself or even for your customer. That can go a long way, and your customers will actually appreciate that. And then the other thing I'll say, have questions prepared for your customer as you're sharing this new feature. This is your opportunity actually it's almost like a discovery, right? This is your opportunity to learn about what they're thinking. Are we off from what we were originally saying? So back to those personas, right? Is this going to make sense to them? So take that and then use those insights to take it back to your product team. So, there's a few things you can do here, but most importantly, I think making sure your communication is relevant and honestly, you have to promote it as well. Right. So a monthly webinar on your new announcements new feature announcements, that can be really helpful too. And it's not too much time. It could be like someone that is on your marketing team that helps you out if you have that sort of bandwidth. But yeah, that's sort of my approach. Of course, there's many other ways to do that, automated ways as well. But I think there's certainly some pre-work that needs to be done before you just kind of go get excited and share all that's going on.
Yeah, we think of developing the right solution to those things as part of the design process, as part of the product development process. It's known as first-time user experience or FTUX. That's like just as important of an aspect of the problem as everything else related to it. So we try to think about, again, that user's context. What are they doing every day? In our case, it's a B2B tool. So what are they doing all day, every day? How often are they using our tool versus other companies' tools? In our case, they have to switch between a bunch of different portals, ours being one of them. So we have to understand that context, understand their day-to-day life, and realize that this thing that we're all super pumped about, they might not care about at all. They might totally dismiss it. What's the right way to introduce it into their lives and help them understand the value of it and how they can take advantage of it? And the right way to do that depends totally on what the feature is, how big of a change it is to what they're used to. We try to, again, ship really small changes really frequently so that nothing's really disrupting their workflow too much. But once in a while, we do rework the workflow in some major way. And it's really important to address that first-time experience way in advance in our case, because people want to retrain their staff and have plenty of time to prepare for the change and understand what's going on. We do use some automated tools if it's helpful to share. We were using Pendo for a while. Now we're using app queues. Which just allows you to kind of build little pop-ups and widgets and tutorials and guides right onto your software. And it's really easy to set up and is a pretty good experience.
I find videos are super effective. I mean, in just quick, short tutorials of something that's new, you throw it in an email or otherwise in app by using some of the tools you mentioned, Seth. So I mean, use that to our advantage. We have so much technology available to us, and I'll give you an example. Being a solopreneur, I feel that I use Canva all the time. And it literally, when I log in, I feel like it's speaking to my exact problem. And they're doing something right. And I don't know exactly, but I just know it's solving my pain point, right, for that day. So, I mean, just as an example, they celebrate little wins. Like I've made 1,000 designs, for example. So this confetti starts to fall. So it's just like a happy moment. So little things like that can help with that product adoption.
I think another thing to add on is looking at really good change logs or like release notes. I think the best company that I've seen it do so far is Arc, which is a browser company. I think their release notes and updates are really, really, really well done. I mean, I think it also depends on the type of scale, but I think having that sort of like communication with your customers, and remember, they're humans. I'm going to repeat that again. Your customers are humans. They are not just, I think a lot of times we forget that,
right.
And it's like, make it a little fun, make it a little exciting. Again, those little wins are like, kind of like saying, hey, we know that you're here, or thinking about those really fun KPIs of internal analytics. Because believe me, people are obsessed with themselves. Like Spotify Wrapped is a great example of that. Yes, let's think about this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to share all my favorite music with the world so everyone can see my personal stats that I listened to Casey Musgraves the most last year.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I just want to bring drive home that point.
Yeah. I think I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say effective messaging, right? Like your positioning of like whatever you're rolling out and whatever you're communicating, make it super relevant so that they understand, and use your marketing resources, leverage them if you have them, right? To get that on point. They're experts there. So, I just find that if you get that right, you'll start to see people come back to your product over and over again.
Let's talk about those people coming back. So, first comms is different from getting that engagement from ongoing customers. And we've said in past sessions, you can't always hit a homer, right? Like there are going to be some failures along the way, but how do you keep customers engaged and hooked? And what do you do in terms of collecting that feedback or that ongoing education, engagement, feedback that goes back into your development process?
Yeah, I think keeping the excitement with all the noise that's out there right now for any product is a very challenging job for sure. However, I'm going to go back to having some sort of standards or some sort of playbook in place for how you keep that excitement going, whether it's the initial, the communication or it's ongoing. So it has to be a stream of communication. And it could be through, like we said, in-app or email or videos, whatever not. But, if you have that regular communication going, you would create almost a playbook around it. See if it worked, right? So let's say you actually build out a feature, you roll it out, you do all of these 10 things to communicate that out, and then you measure it. Did it work? How was the adoption at that point? If it worked, great. If not, you pivot. Otherwise, if you don't measure anything, you won't know if it worked, right? So I think that is a very critical piece on keeping that stream of communication going and having some sort of standard internally. In terms of the feedback, in my previous experience, I think having like you said, humans, we're all humans, right? So having a relationship with your customer is critical. So even if you're in product, you can talk to one or two of your customers and build that relationship to say, hey, what do you think of XYZ, right? So, and being careful about who you ask too. So let me preface that. Are they going to be honest with you? Will they make the time for it? Will they thoroughly go through that feature? Will they really want to be excited and be an advocate to give you that feedback as well? So I think you have to be careful, but don't be afraid to ask your customers. And I think you do that in your company really well. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been doing that I think is really mutually beneficial both to the product and design team as well as helpful in keeping up engagement and getting the users continuously excited and feeling good to be working with our product is we basically do a couple things. One, we run quarterly surveys, which we just do right in the product to collect NPS scores, and we do like a CSAT, like customer satisfaction set of questions as well in that same survey. So we can report quarterly on how people are feeling about things, and that's all pretty expected and typical. But then within the folks who respond to those surveys, we also ask, would you be willing to participate in a more frequent advisory panel role? And we got maybe 10-15% of the people who responded to the surveys to say yes to that. And we have them in a database that our product team can then reach out to at any time. And that's the folks that we reach out to first when we have a question about how they think about a new workflow or think about a particular problem that we're looking to solve. And what's cool is that we have come back to several of the same people over and over again, and they're always so excited to participate in the product development process. They repeatedly say, wow, no other health insurance company or vendor like us ever participated, ever asked us to think about things like this before. Typically the experience is a company tells them, here's the product, here's how it's going to have to work, good luck. You never hear from them. So these folks tell us at the end of the interviews, like, thank you so much for asking for my opinion. And then they see that their opinion feeds into updates. And oftentimes when we're shipping a feature based on insights that we got from them, we'll send them a personal note saying, thanks again for your input. As you'll see in this upcoming feature release, we actually did something based on what you told us. So it creates that repeated engagement and a really loyal user base, I think, but also really helps us, make better product decisions along the way.
I think it goes back to the stickiness factor, right? I think building advocacy, and like you were saying earlier, is like getting that customer to be just more sticky. It's a relationship again, right? You're building a relationship through a customer advisory board or whatever you might call it. So I've seen those work really well. But again, being really careful with who you're choosing to be part of it and not be too big. An intimate group usually tends to work better.
And whether you collected that feedback or not, let's say you did roll something out and you hit the mark. It's either someone who regularly supplies feedback, or maybe it's someone you don't really hear from, but now you've discovered something's not right for how their user experience or their workflow is. How often should that happen? Does that happen? How can you avoid it? What do you do when that does happen?
Yeah, it's really tricky for us because so it's an enterprise tool that we work on primarily when we're talking about external users. And depending on the patient and the health insurance they have, these folks who work in doctors' offices, they have to use our tool. We're like the delegated required tool that they have to use. So like stickiness isn't an issue. Like in these cases, they have to use our product anyway. And we want them to have as good of an experience as possible. We measure that experience, like I said, and we report on that to our investors and our future clients as well, because the health insurance companies want the doctor's offices to be happy. And, there's like this trickle down thing. But there's tension there too, because oftentimes we need people to behave a certain way or do something a certain way that maybe they don't want to do. And so we have other metrics that are also really important to our business in terms of changing people's behavior. And sometimes that has to do with ordering a different medical service that is more in line with the clinical guidelines, for example. And that's maybe not what the user came there to do that day. And so to them, the product might be actually creating friction and frustration. But to us, that's necessary and intentional because we want them to do something different. So it's a tricky balance. Like for us, I guess to answer your question, we're oftentimes very intentional about harming the user experience metrics so that we can improve the other clinical metrics, for example. And we try to be really intentional about that. And we often have in the metrics that we're tracking for one of those initiatives, we have both the clinical metric and goal there, and then we have like a user experience metric and goal. And that's kind of like, try not to let it drop below X number, because we know it's going to maybe take a dip, and let's monitor that really carefully. But it's okay for it to go a few points down as long as we are seeing that positive impact on the other side. So I think just being intentional about it is what I'm trying to say.
And then if we transition to, I know we've been talking about customer enablement and announcements, but what about internal enablement, right? Like you've released something. How are you educating your sales team? How are you working with product marketing to ensure that you're building innovative things, you're taking their input, but they're not getting out too far ahead and releasing or putting things out there that you're not ready for, or selling things that you're not ready for?
I can take this on, or start off with this. So there's kind of like two ways I look at it. There's the internal, like, so I work on internal tools at HBO. So I work on the tools that that internal teams will use to be able to place the content that you see on the platform. I think the biggest thing that I run into is when we talk to our stakeholders, it's what they, again, kind of getting back to like what they want versus what they need. But then they might have a set idea of like, well, these are the things that we need, kind of getting to your friction point. And that happens a lot where they're going like, well, we need X, Y, and Z. But we're looking at it from a product design and engineering perspective. And we're like, well, actually, it sounds like you really want this. And it's almost becoming a conversation on actually convincing them, hey, we're going to take a different route, even though there might be a lot of friction in the beginning. But it's almost like, again, going back to that politician, like, well, how do we sell them on this vision, on what we're really trying to do? So I think that's one area. When I worked in startups, to address your question about, well, how do I market the product I'm actually building? It's really about getting that cross-functional alignment on getting really good document. How do you minimize documentation, but make it effective? And that's really, I'd say, like, until you become an enterprise, that's really, I think, half the battle is how do I communicate these ideas that an engineer understands what the value, like making sure that your engineering team understands the value propositions, the design team understands the value propositions, the sales team understands the value propositions, and your marketing team understands the value propositions of like, wait, what is actually the product? And the problem that gets really tricky is if your product has multiple stakeholders, it's really understanding, well, what are the things that those stakeholders each care about differently? And I think being able to figure out ways to have a one source of truth document is, like, again, kind of getting back to some of the earlier points about like FAQs, and really just say, here's everything you could possibly know about it. And really just having one place for that information is just so key, I would just say off the bat.
I think if there's any way to build in accountability in an organization cross-functionally. So what I mean by that is, like, sales is required to understand what's going on with product. I know that's very high level, but like there's some like quarterly goals you have to really meet with one or two people in product, meet with customer success or design or whoever, right? If there's something rolled around that, it could potentially help. But again, it's not a solution for everyone. It's just something that is another idea to help really promote cross collaboration, and that will also help promote, you know, the value of whatever you're trying to build out across the organization.
I want to ask one final question to each of you before we take maybe a couple from the audience. And that is, what is the hardest thing, the most challenging thing about product innovation from your respective lens? So many challenges. Look, they're thinking.
So many. I think product innovation needs to be with the customer on top of mind. I think I really hit that point a lot today. So I feel like we naturally get excited about, oh, we're going to create all these great features, but you forget about the customer and the experience the customer is actually going to have. And is it going to integrate with the flow of work they have today? Or is it completely off, right? Like, I think really making sure it's a cohesive experience as you're building out new things. Talking to your customers, listening to them, let that fuel and direct your product innovation.
I think for us, with so many amazing, fun ideas of things that we want to work on, it really comes down to deciding on what to actually spend our resources doing. We always have way more ideas than time to build those ideas. So that's always the most frustrating thing. There's so many things that people want to be working on. Only so many engineers, only so many designers, only so many product people to scope all those things. Mm-hmm. So I think just doing as much analysis as you can up front to identify which things are likely to have the most impact and in what sequence does it make the most sense to build those things is how we mitigate against that that challenge. But it persists, and you know, building up the team, scaling up the team so that you can build more things is like you're never really gonna get there. You're always gonna be chasing it, because the more people you hire, the more ideas that are gonna be generated too. So just I think thinking really analytically upfront as much as you can, as much as makes sense, without getting stuck in, you know, like analysis paralysis, but just saying like, these are some things that we think are going to be most impactful. Let's run some quick estimates on what do we think is actually going to move the needle the most, and find the right sequence that keeps things going.
I would say, at least from a corporate perspective, leadership's OKRs versus on the ground OKRs is probably the hardest disconnect that I think every organization has, where they're like, we need to launch in all these markets, but our buffering time could be lower. Well, we need to do this, this, and this, but this one core feature is broken. And it's always about trying to find that middle ground and then figuring out, okay, where do we stick in the fun stuff? And so I'd say actually the hardest part is dealing with people.
All right. Any questions from the audience? All right.
So on that subject of challenges and dealing with people, I wonder if you could speak to the challenge of when the user of your product is different from the customer, the one who's paying for it.
We have that exact challenge. I actually intended to bring it up earlier in the panel, so thanks for asking. Yeah, so our customers are the big health insurance companies, like I mentioned, and our users are the staff who work for doctors' offices primarily at this point in our company growth. We have ambitions to maybe build products that address other customers, but that's basically how it works now. So some of the challenges are like in the sales process, like we were saying earlier. The people we're selling to are like chief medical officers and chief strategy officers and you know, high level executives at these humongous health insurance companies. These are like Fortune 100 companies. And they oftentimes have no clue what it's like to be a staff person who works in the back office of a small doctor's office in Ohio. Like no idea whatsoever who those people are. So it's partially our job to like elevate the real life experience of those folks into those conversations, and find ways to make that relevant to those buyers of our services. You know, the other thing that I think is interesting is we who are like really closely focused on the end user experience, the people in those doctors' offices, their staff, also don't know a ton about the needs and wants and anxieties of the executives at those insurance companies. So to that end, we kind of lean on the sales team to almost like do the research for us on the product team to figure out like, okay, what do big health insurance companies care about actually? And because we're not really able to do research there per se, because it's pre-market, it's pre-sale, we actually use the salespeople as researchers in a sense to help us understand what does the market actually need. So that's like some aspects of the challenge and some ways that we're thinking about it. Does that make sense?
All right. I think we will go ahead and stop there. Thank everyone. Please thank the panelists for their time.